Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Going back to the idea that the Wayfarer Foundation is Baha'i inspired, like in the Baha'i writings, one of the things that talks about is how social action doesn't happen from a distance. In a sense, it's not like I'm gonna read about a community somewhere and then decide what they need to do. That read about an issue that a community is having, and then I'm going to decide what they need to do, and then I'm going to fly in and tell them what they need to do. They talk about, it says we need to stand shoulder to shoulder, and I think that's what the foundation is trying to do. Yeah, and there's like a couple ways that plays out. Yeah, so for example, one of the things that we did when we invited our Native partners out to come to Chicago, one of the things that we realized early on is that they're almost all these organizations are almost entirely led by Native women, except for like one or two. But then there's also this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, where Native women, I mean, it's a wild number. It's like 4 times more likely to go be murdered or go missing than, a white woman or something. So, and then because of different, tribal laws and FBI and jurisdiction, a lot of times they don't get investigated. So it's just a lot, and it's also all the result of colonization and genocide. But when we were inviting these women out, we said, well, we need to keep them safe. Like, we need to make sure that they get here safely. So we said, everyone fly with someone, however you get here, we'll help you get here, but also bring someone with you, And I think that was, really powerful for the partners because I think it was a sign, and I'm not trying to like puff up like Wayfarer, or something, or like pat ourselves on the back, but I think it was just something that the foundation, like, I'm really proud, was like aware of, like, this issue, and this, among these people, this is like a life or death issue. Traveling to Chicago for a lot of folks may not be a big thing, but it could be life threatening for others, and then how do we account for that? What is our role in providing for that? And then just one other thing that's interesting is we also are we're working with the Hopi Foundation, which is located on the Hopi land in Arizona. And as I was talking with them, one of the things that was so interesting is they said a lot of most Native peoples in the United States or North America are having to deal with forced relocation. They were pushed west or forced west, or a lot of them don't live where they used to, their ancestral homelands. But they said the Hopi people were never pushed off their land, and a lot of the Pueblo peoples were never lived there. So it's like they still have to deal with colonization, but it's like a very different experience. It's more about, they said it's not about reclamation, it's about preservation, which I thought was so interesting. And I was really glad they made that point to me, that it's like, yes, we're Native American, but we have very different experiences and things that we're trying to do as a people, and none of that would have come about if we didn't have a conversation,
Right.
So yeah, just to highlight your point, yeah, all these different like cultural differences and subcultural, or something, have to be accounted for,
They do. I know, which means it takes a little more time, right? The conversations need to be they need to be a little longer. The meetings, maybe there are more meetings, or the meetings need to, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, they need to take into account different aspects of organization and planning, and it really changes every aspect of community building, and whether you're talking about a foundation and organizations, or even just communities who are working within their own, people, organizations working within their own communities, just directly on the ground, even without a
Yeah.
foundation. It changes the template, in my mind, for planning work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are valuable insights, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about, I mean, the more I go along, because this whole world of foundations was new to me when I started. But now that I get down to it, and then as our team talks about it more, it really also is all about community building. Like within our team, we want to build community with each other and trust each other and have relationships. And then with our partners, we want to have community with them. And then we also want to help them build community with other organizations, And for me, it's, I mean, when I get to work with like these Black and Native led organizations, they to me are really modeling what community looks like, Um, uh, yeah, like this Heart Cambridge organization, where they're like everybody needs to be met with love and compassion when they're in crisis, or um, oh, I just had this other. Oh yeah, so and then one of the interesting things when talking about this relationship between traditional relationship between foundations and organizations that are looking for a grant, one of the things that's really stood out to me that is it holds true particularly with Native organizations is when I meet with non-Native organizations, primarily that are maybe like white led, it's whenever I talk with them, whenever I have a first conversation, it it the dynamic really feels like, even though I'm not trying to do this, it always feels like I'm interviewing them, almost as if it's like a first date kind of, or something,
Mm.
like they're trying to kind of impress the person from the foundation, which I totally get, because that's how the relationship has been set up in a way. It's like I have the resources. I can kind of say, here are the things I need to know. Here are the hoops you have to jump through to get at what I have. Like that's been the template, like you said, for a long time. But when I meet with Native organizations, it's almost the flip side. It's almost like I'm being interviewed to see if we would be a fit with their community, and it's which I feel like that's how it should be, And
Yes.
it's so interesting how clear that is, that they're like, we're going to see if we want you to be in our space. It's so interesting.
Yes. That's so much. That is a much more empowering stance, or
Yeah.
empowered stance, which is why I was thinking, oh, you're right. We were talking about the power dynamic. Like, who really has the power? Sure, the dollars are
Yeah.
powerful. No one's denying that.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the idea of making sure you've, as an organization or a community, that you feel honored, that you're appreciated and honored by a foundation, or a donor source,
Mhm.
because that also contributes to the, I guess, this culture, this culture of grants and giving and being of service. That really just transforms. And I can't help but keep using that word transform. That's the word of the day,
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah.
But I mean it sincerely. It's very powerful to think about. It's it's really about what comes from these changes, and you're
Mhm.
sharing examples about new ways, with everybody involved, with everyone who's coming to the table, new ways of approaching these kinds of relationships
Yeah.
and this work. And the fruits will be whatever your foundation and any other foundation who takes these same steps and approaches. And it's really what gets shared, what gets passed on in terms of the learnings and the insights, and and how these organizations talk about their experience with receiving these resources and what it's doing for what it's allowing them to do. That's really what it is. What's allowing them to do in maybe even in a more effective way in their communities. Those are the stories I hope that get told, not just the story of, oh, our foundation has given, 2,000 grants in 1 month, and what's the fruit of it all, really? Let's get to
Yeah.
this. Let's get to the story, and the stories are the learnings that you're sharing from the foundation, the donor perspective, but also how is it evolving? How are things changing on the ground? And that will change the culture of this part of life too.
Yeah.
And I really value that.
Yeah.
Please.
Oh, see, just yeah, as you were talking, you were talking about the word of the day, transformation. I was just thinking of there's this part in the Baha'i writings that was, I think it was written in the 40s or 50s. But it says that white people need to have a revolutionary transformation in their attitudes and interactions with Black folks. So I don't know, it just made me think of that because I think about that a lot. Like, what does that look like? What is a revolutionary transformation in the way that white folks, interact with Black folks? And it's funny, as you were talking, because I think I've always pictured that as being more interpersonal, but I think that's what, and again, I'm really not trying to like say our team is like the best, like, that we have it all figured out. But I think that's what our team is trying to do. And it's like, I think for me, it's just amazing and humbling to be a part of a team that is operating that way, but I think that's just, as you were talking, I just realized I think that's what we're trying to do, is like have a revolutionary transformation in the way that people with kind of traditional access to power and authority interact with people that have been traditionally oppressed and excluded from, positions of power and authority. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yes. No, I appreciate your reflection on this too. It's the revolutionary transformation. Yeah, that's something to chew on and think about more.
Yeah.
I really, you and I have talked about this before. I really like the concept of everybody wins, right? Those, whether it's we're talking about, foundations and donors and organizations and communities, or even just everyday life, going to work as an individual, trying to help out in your community. This idea that everybody wins, I know it sounds so amazing and lofty even, but that to me is an important principle. And really, cooperation, I think, is the virtue that allows that to manifest. So that I was reading I have a collection of virtues cards, right? All kinds of virtues, understanding, love, unity, acceptance, so on and so forth. And the cooperation card, I believe, I was reading this with friends not too long ago, maybe a few months ago. And the idea is that everybody gets to make their contribution, and everybody's contribution is unique and necessary. And that's a different spirit. I think that spirit is sort of on the surface is a part of our everyday lives. You go to work and you work with the team, and people understand, okay, everybody's contribution is important, right? To be productive and so on. But when we're talking even more about power dynamics, positions of power, and positions seemingly of no power, this idea of everybody winning still applies, right? It's so, in other words, I think when I think about people who are in really prestigious positions, whether that's government or the head of a company or on a board or what have you, that the idea, and we talked about this last time in our conversation, the idea that everybody can still win if we make room for other people. It's not like making room for someone else to join us at the table means it's taking away from another individual's opportunities. But we're still, we haven't really, this is not a conversation I think that is in the spotlight. I mean, it's still sort of the mentality, at least where we live in the West, is like, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm ambitious. I'm going to make whatever I need happen so that I can succeed. And sure, you know, sometimes there are other people who join in you with that, but it's something you said made me I think the power dynamic part of this that you were referencing made me think about, how do we change our mentality about what it looks like when everyone succeeds, no matter what your position is, no matter where you're at in the scheme of life. How can everyone succeed and feel like their contributions are valuable, but they don't have to like cut somebody else off or kind of push them down in order to thrive. And I suppose this concept it's a large, I know it's a very broad idea that I'm thinking about, but I still think about the idea of men in particular in positions of power, and having had a long run at having access to a lot of opportunities. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing immoral about having access to opportunities and taking advantage of them. At least in my estimation, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. No one's committing a crime, so to speak. But to then say, well, I don't want to make room for someone else, or I've worked hard. I've paid my dues. Why would I like give someone else an opportunity? Like even that mentality, like, let me give someone else an opportunity. It's still something that I think about, this idea of holding on to power because you believe if you let go of that power, you're going to lose everything that you've built for yourself, say as an individual, for yourself in the world, or, you know, your contributions won't be as valuable. I still like to have this conversation with you because you have such interesting insights. And I think with your work, even before your work with this foundation, you've had a lot of insight into being in a lot of spaces where there are primarily women at times. And you've learned a lot, I know, from this perspective. I'm just curious if there's anything new you've learned being a male in the world, but also as you observe, you know, other men in maybe the work you do, whether it's with the foundation or even if it's just in your own kind of community life, or anywhere else. But I really like to promote the idea that like we can all still survive, more than survive. We can all thrive, and we can all make our contributions, and we can all be valued without having to like hold on so tightly to these positions of power.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is kind of this, I would say some of the subtle, but maybe not always so subtle ways that I feel like it's, primarily men that have positions of power and authority, the way they try to keep it is, I'm still trying to find the words for it, but it's basically they accuse other people of doing something that they do, but they put a spin on it to make it seem like it's negative. So I first started actually noticing this when I noticed that uh, politicians, I noticed this in politicians and journalists, and they would say, especially around Black Lives Matter, when the Black Lives Matter movement first came around, they would accuse Black people of engaging in identity politics, as if that's something that white folks don't do. You know, they would be like, oh, Black people or the Latinx people or something, they're engaging in identity politics and they're making it us and them and they're dividing society. And then they have, and then a lot of those same folks, for example, would be very vocal about critical race theory being taught in schools or something like that, as if that's not a form of identity politics, or legislation that makes it harder for people of color to vote is also not a form of identity politics. Like, and then I've also noticed it particularly with men, where I just say white, like white men, is they often accuse like younger people, people of color, LGBTQ folks of being um, of creating safe spaces where they can't be challenged. So they would say, um, and then they would make it negative, like they would say like, oh, these snowflakes, they all need a safe space, and they kind of make a joke out of being triggered. And just to me, it seems like this really subtle way of saying, well, so first, it's funny that when you think about like a safe space, to me, the two biggest, most well-regulated, well-funded safe spaces in the world are Congress and Fortune 500 CEOs, which are almost completely wealthy white men. So it's funny that they would say that other people are making safe spaces when they've made it so hard for people to enter their safe space, and then they make it almost like a joke, as if people are triggered, which is a legitimate mental health term. It's someone's trauma has been triggered and they're reliving a trauma. It's kind of devolved into this idea that like, oh, you're just offended because of something I said and you can't take it, so now you're triggered and you want a safe space. And it just, to me, it feels like these really subtle ways of basically saying, I like to make the rules and I want to say whatever I want to say, do whatever I want to do. So I'm going to kind of make it like delegitimize other people that I feel like are maybe trying to set the rules. Because I think that's ultimately what's happening is people of color and LGBTQ folks and young folks, they're trying to change the rules about anything, about the way corporations are run, about the way workplaces are, about how we dress for Halloween, or sports teams mascots, or the pronouns we use. They're trying to change the rules, and I feel like there's been kind of this a backlash where it's like, no, we make the rules here, and you're just trying to keep, you're being too sensitive. You're a snowflake. You can't take any disagreements, so let's just make it so I can keep making the rules. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know if I articulated that well. This is still kind of processing.
I'm following you. Yes. I think it's a very complex, layered, dynamic, right? And this is where, again, I feel like conversations, and I'm not talking about Twitter conversations because that's not always the most helpful forum. Although sometimes I do observe people really trying hard to have respectful debate. And I really appreciate that there are people out there who are trying. I follow those threads on Twitter sometimes, just reading them. I don't add or tweet, and engage, but there are people who really are trying, and they'll say things like genuine question, after someone said something. And they do really mean like, I'm not trying to, be defensive or be, or attack you, but I genuinely need to ask this question. But I would say that it's not the overall spirit. So when I think conversations, it's almost back to you were reading something you said from the Baha'i writings, or you were quoting the relationship between blacks and whites that was written many, many years ago about, I guess, racial unity and harmony. That was my understanding. That it's like when you were talking about that, it made me think everybody has a role. Everybody has a role in the process. And I guess for men, maybe even white men, in terms of the change and the transformation of our society, there is their white male role, I would assume, looks a little different than someone else's role, the role of a woman, or the role of a woman, of person of color, or whatever other category, if we want to use that kind of term, would be in connection with a white male out in the world. The conversations, though, it's like that Twitter conversation I was referencing. There has to be a willingness to be sincere and to say, you know what? Yeah, I want to talk to you. I want to understand. And I can share about where I'm coming from. I'll be honest, without trying to defend it or preserve, but just in having an open conversation with another person, as an example, to try to understand each other. And not just, understand each other, but then to me, the next step in real relationship building isn't just about the understanding, although that's critical. It's about creating a rapport, building a bond. And that looks different for every kind of relationship, right? But these are like these are the soft people skills, right? Right? Yeah. Which sometimes employers will say we care about those more than the hard skills, although I don't know if that's really true, but I'm sure there's some sort of balance that people are looking for. But I'm thinking about changing relationships, changing and these power dynamics we're talking about white men having the upper hand, so to speak. I think that there is a lot of room and a lot of opportunity to change these dynamics in a way that allows everybody to step up, to be their best selves, to heal, so that maybe there's less trauma that's being triggered, right? So that we really can have people who are getting their needs met and addressed. But the understanding, like the real understanding of like another human and the coming together, that takes work. And that's not like that can't be superficial.
Yeah.
It's got to be authentic, and it's got to be genuine. I think it's really hard to do that at a national level. As an example, it's really hard to do that where you're like, okay, we're talking about, like you were talking about these arenas like government and or politics and media and the world of, just like commentators and podcasters and wherever dialogue's happening or wherever like those places of authority are existing. It's really hard to make that kind of change. And I think that on the ground, in your day-to-day life, that's where it can happen, but it requires real conversations, like what you were talking about in terms of your foundation, looking at how to change the relationship and dynamic with the organizations, your partners, changing, how long you allow for the conversation. That's all about understanding who and what the needs are and what the cultural dynamics are of these groups and organizations and communities and tribes. And so that to me is where the real change happens. So I'm with you, and definitely I think your assessment of how this plays out and where we see it like on a kind of large scale is accurate to the best of my ability. It seems very accurate. It's I guess I'm asking myself, where does the transformation really happen? And to me, it's about the human heart. To me, that's what it boils down to. Yeah. The intellectual part is important, but if it doesn't get to like the the humanity, then I don't think people will be willing to one, see another person and see them for who they really are and appreciate them, but also say, you know what, yeah, let me rethink my approach to this. Maybe I don't have to hold on so tightly to
Yeah.
my power, sometimes perceived power, but certainly there's real power and authority. Um, but to me, that's what our whole conversation today really does boil down to. It's about the humanity. I know that word is,
Yeah.
I don't know what other word to use, but it's about the heart, connecting with someone else's humanity, your humanity connecting with theirs, and seeing who they really are, or a group of people who they really are, and what they're all about. I don't know if you agree, but to me, that's the real work. And I think it's probably going to happen at the ground level, in your family, in your community, in your neighborhood, in your tribe, wherever people are residing. It's that's the real work. That, I guess, that revolutionary transformation. I know you said it, you when you used to think about that, you thought about it kind of person to person, and then you sort of brought that principle kind of up to the higher level. And I guess now I'm saying I want to bring it also back down again.
Yeah.
I guess it's both. It really is both levels. But I think when we show up as individuals to work, or to do our whatever we do every day, we're bringing who we are, and we're bringing our consciousness and reality to that environment, and that's going to affect our attitudes and how we contribute.
Yeah.
I think it's all about the personal work. Husayn, I wonder what you think.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Yeah, I know. And time consuming again, because I was just thinking, it's like, at least where I'm thinking right now is that ultimately it comes down to people who've been in power, or have some kind of like social position traditionally. They have to be vulnerable, like. And I think, just speaking for like kind of like, I mean, about white men as a whole, because I do know white men that are very vulnerable, but I think as a whole, we're not really trained to be vulnerable. And I think that's where I see a lot of conversations when there's conversations between two different groups of people. It's that the person in power, or that has access to power or social standing, they're not willing to say, like, maybe that, maybe when that Black person told me that they had been harassed by police, maybe they were right, because I think what happens is, because to be able to do that, you have to be vulnerable, and to think, maybe actually the way I've been taught about police and about how crime happens, maybe that was all wrong. It's like you have to be vulnerable and be open to saying, maybe a lot of the ways I thought about the world were completely wrong. The way that the world worked, or the way that the world has worked for me, is completely wrong, and it doesn't work for everybody else. And I think that's really hard, and I've been seeing that play out, particularly in relation to race, but also with gender and sexuality, because I see it happen a lot. Like, I was just one of the things I was just thinking about recently is this Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist. He was, I think, banned from Twitter because of comments he made about Elliot Page,
Yeah, he said he was suspended. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. And he made this video on YouTube. It's funny, he says he's canceled, but he made this video on YouTube that has hundreds of thousands, not millions of views at it. But anyway, but he just kind of made light of this whole thing about gender and trans identities and things like that. And it's like, imagine if he was just vulnerable and said, oh, what if the way Elliot Page lives is different than mine? But I think he's, not trying to analyze it, but maybe just abstract it a little bit more. I think what needs to happen is for people to say, yeah, maybe people do live differently than I do. And the way I've been taught to live isn't the right way, or doesn't work for everyone, or is not sustainable. But yeah, I think that happens in the home with your parents. I that's the like the root of it, I think, is men raising other men to be vulnerable. And I think that's why it's going to take a really long time, you know?
I agree. I agree. And then the support of everyone else around, the men,
Yeah.
is
Community. Yeah.
it's the community. And there are, I mean, I watch a lot of podcasts, and I say watch because I actually watch the videos, but sometimes I listen too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I but I listen to a lot of conversations. I'm aware of conversations
Mm-hmm.
that men are having, especially in the States, around these social challenging issues. And there are men who are thinking in nuanced ways.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who are necessarily being interviewed on CNN or the or Fox or the mainstream,
Or Joe Rogan.
or Joe Rogan, although I think some of them, maybe the ones I'm thinking of, maybe have been, but
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
yeah, but there's still, kind of a minor voice in the conversation. But when I do catch, interviews and or conversations with men who are thinking more nuanced, like they don't feel like they have to even say what their ideological beliefs are or affiliations are. Like they're just saying, I just want to talk about this. I want to talk about this topic. I want to talk about this issue, and they bring in their values naturally, but they don't necessarily like say, well, because I'm on this side, the left or the right, for example, like this is how I feel. And there is more nuance, I think, a little bit more nuance to their opinions and their thinking. And so I appreciate that those conversations are happening. Again, they're not mainstream necessarily, but it's heartening to know that there are men who are actually they're trying to think about the world, take a step back and consider the world from a different standpoint. And like you said, that takes a lot of time. But I think every generation learns something, hopefully, about the bigger picture of life and the idea of what really matters in terms of our kind of collective existence here together and how we want to move forward.
Yeah.
I think every generation is learning more and more what's involved in that reality. And it does warm my heart. Again, I know it's not the mainstream, but I think there are a lot of conversations happening, and now everyone and their mom has a podcast. So a lot of, I mean, for better or for worse, you just hear a lot more about how people are thinking about the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are definitely the polarizing conversations and atmospheres, but there's a lot in between. There's a lot in between the polar opposites, whatever those opposites really represent. But I'm not always super clear, but the people who are nuanced, that's what I'm really getting at. So I appreciate that that's out there. I think it's out there more than people are aware of sometimes.
Yeah.
So there is hope. But I just wanted to ask you, because I know that you think a lot about many things in the world, but about the idea of power and authority and men and where we're at. So I appreciate you sharing your current thoughts about that.
Sure, yeah.
And is there anything else you wanted to mention before we bring it to a close?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, again, I always appreciate our conversations. They're so dynamic. I feel like you and I both, we have the thoughts that we have maybe coming into the conversation. We have our ideas, but I think you and I seem to be really open and able to have some real-time like reflection. And I always value that.
Yeah.
Saying about you.
Yeah. Likewise. I feel like we pick stuff out, then of what each other said, and build on it.
Yes.
So
Yes, agreed.
nice.
Well, before we do completely come to an end, I want to ask, like I always do, about favorite TV shows, new or old, or anything that you're watching that you want to recommend.
Uh, I just finished The Bear. Is that?
Oh, I've heard of
Have you
it.
heard of
I
it?
don't, haven't
Yeah,
seen
it's
it.
on Hulu. It's about a man, um, a chef in Chicago. So
Cool. Okay.
yeah,
I
it's
saw a
just
trailer, and but
yeah.
is it drama? Is it serious?
I guess it's serious. It's
Mm-hmm.
like he inherits a restaurant from his brother who's recently passed. And then, but then actually, it was interesting. I just saw an article about how there's two versions of masculinity that are presented in the show. And it's almost like which one has a future and which one doesn't, you know?
Ooh,
So it's really, that's really interesting.
that's right up my alley.
Yeah, yeah,
Stop on by. No, I
yeah,
will go check it out. Yeah, that's
yeah,
cool. Okay. Yeah, we need to understand there are other ways, and
yeah,
examples are really helpful.
yeah,
Cool. Okay.
yeah,
Well, thank you again, Hussein. I appreciate you being here. Your voice is
yeah,
always valued here on the podcast. And
yeah.
thanks for
Thanks for having
sharing
me.
about, of course, thanks for sharing about all that you're doing. And I wish your foundation well in all
Thank
its
you.
work.
Thank you.